It has long been thought that our brain and who we are is fixed after our infancy. That means that no matter what we do, the brain essentially stays the same. You were born with certain types of genes, you maybe had some early childhood experiences that still had an effect on you, but that was it. From then on, you were bound to fluctuate around the same level. You were either introverted or extroverted. You were either a more happy type of person or more melancholic, more unhappy kind of person. Thankfully, this was proven wrong not too long ago. It is actually quite far from the truth. Well, otherwise, the goal of this course, to create positive long-term change, would be rather cynical. At the end of the last century, scientists started to notice that the brain actually does change. And this ability of the brain to change is what's called neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity stands for the remarkable capacity of the brain to change itself. The brain is actually able to change throughout our lifetime. Even when you're 90 years old, your brain changes. It still forms new connections. One of the famous groundbreaking studies that showed scientists that the brain actually does change throughout life was the London cab driver study. For everybody who has ever been to London, it is quite clear that it's a hard to navigate city. London cab drivers famously have to take a navigational test before they are permitted to cab around in London. Every black cab driver in central London has to have what's called the knowledge, a memorized map of the capital, including 25,000 streets and thousands of landmarks. It's a brutal learning process that can take 3 to 4 years to complete with a final test. So when researchers looked at the spatial memory parts in the cab drivers' brains, they found that these parts are significantly larger than the ones of normal people. What this implied was previously unimaginable, that the spatial part of the brain can grow as a result of the many hours studying the map of London. But the brain can do even more. Sea gypsies, for example, are nomadic people who live in a cluster of tropical islands. They spend most of their lives in boats on the open sea. And they can see clearly underwater in great depths because they learn to control the shape of their lenses and the size of their pupils. Most of us normal people can't do that. And pupil adjustment has been considered to be a fixed, innate reflex. However, in a study, Swedish children were able to learn this trick. Their brains responded to the training. This is mind-blowing. Researchers all of a sudden began to realize that our brain is actually much more powerful than we thought for such a long time. It is actually able to change itself constantly. Let's see how the brain works. This is inside our brain. Here we see a picture showing a neuron and its many pathways leading away from it to other neurons. There are about 100 trillion neurons, 100 trillion connections in the brain. Some are thin and some are much thicker. You can also see this in this picture here. And every time we do something or think something, a specific pattern of neuron fires. And every time a specific pattern of neurons fires, the connections grow. A great example to think about it is thinking of a stream. Just like a stream, every time water passes, the stream gets a little bit wider. And the more water passes, meaning the more often a new neural connection is made, the wider the stream grows. When a new connection is created, for example, you learn how to play an instrument, the connection is very weak. It takes time to move the right fingers and it requires you to consciously control the movements. But as you keep practicing, the neural pathways strengthen. Like a stream that grows, our neural pathway grows. And the more often you practice, the better you get. And the neural pathways turn from a stream to a river. Unfortunately, the same is true if we stop practicing. Let's say I ignore my instrument for a year. Some of the neural pathways will have grown thinner. Just like a river that lacks water, the pathways weaken again. New pathways or connections in our brain can be created at any point in our lives. It doesn't matter if we're 5 years old or if we're 90 years old. Neurons develop and grow throughout our lives. So since those early studies that I told you about before, other researchers have found numerous ways how we can rewire our brains to be more positive, productive, resilient, and so on. So if our thoughts, daily activities, and behaviors can change the brain, the great question becomes not if, but how change is possible. That's what we are going to explore now.